I think I've gone live. Let me check. Trying to see if you. Yeah, I'm live. Sweet. Alright. So, this stream I'm doing, I'm just going to go over the letter to America, which is the main source I used for that video I posted 2 days ago, would have been 2 or 3 days ago. I made a video for 9/11, basically describing Osama bin Laden's intent, like his motivations behind the 9/11 attack, the whole American involvement in the Middle East prior to 9/11, and explaining some of the actions of America following 9/11 and how that might have unfortunately proved many of Osama's claims and worries to be right, which is, not great to think about. But posted that video 2-3 days ago, and I was like, okay, well, what I'll do is I'll make a stream a few days after, and I'll actually just read through line by line Osama bin Laden's manifesto, the letter to America. It went viral a year ago or so. I remember probably 10 months ago now. It was during summer over here in Australia, and I seen it was going viral, and everyone was talking about it, because I think it was the first time that Americans, average, everyday, normal Americans, had actually read it or realized that there's any reason for the attacks beyond what they were told by the American politicians at the time, which was, oh, he attacked us because freedom, he attacked us because we were so free, and he was just so jealous of our freedom and democracy. So it went viral because people realized, oh wait, he might actually have a reason beyond just basic, just jealousy of freedom or whatever nonsense that they came up with to justify it, so that Americans would have a reason without having to look into the atrocities that America had committed in the Middle East previous. So it went completely viral, I think, on TikTok, where all these Americans for the first time had actually realized that there was a deeper reason behind the attacks. So I don't really think much of it at the time, because I was thinking, okay, it's not really that big of a deal. It's Osama bin Laden's manifesto. It came out 20-30 years ago, and I think the main reason it went viral is because the October 7th attack on Israel last year by Hamas and all the affiliate groups. It brought to light to a lot of people in the West the whole Palestinian issue and crisis for the first time, which has pretty much been ignored by most average day Westerners for pretty much ever since 1948. It breaks into the news and media, but people before, I feel like a lot of people didn't understand at all what it was all about, and just viewed it as a religious conflict and all the sort of nonsense that they're fed to just ignore the truth. But the October 7th attack has really brought it into the mainstream, just dead focus. You cannot ignore the situation anymore, and as we'll see when I go through Osama bin Laden's manifesto, the first chunk of it is all about Palestine. The first reason he gives for his attack is, you attacked us in Palestine, which I did talk about in my videos. The first thing that I brought up in my video was the first section of my video was all about Palestine and complete American, I'm not even going to say aid or support, it's complicity and cooperation with Israel and their actions in the Middle East. So if you guys can hear music in the background, it's Quran recitation, but I thought it would just fill in the dead space a little. But I'll go through this line by line and just explain. He does have a few quotes from the Quran in the manifesto to sort of use religious justification. I'll kind of break down what I'm thinking of each sort of section of it, because while there is stuff, I'm obviously Marxist, Leninist, Maoist, Communist, Marxist, Leninist sort of analysis through dialectical materialism, historical materialism. It's how, like, most communists will analyze history through contradictions and explain how different classes move history forward through contradiction. If you've ever read any of Marx or Engels' works, you'll understand this. Family, the History of Private Property in the State by Engels, or even the Communist Manifesto gives a very brief and basic understanding of where this goes. All the books I have back here, on the side, all the books that I have back here will explain why communists sort of describe history in a certain way, why Marxists, I guess, explain history in a particular way. But obviously this sort of Marxist analysis is not present in Osama bin Laden's I'm not analysis, I guess you can call it, of the of pretty much the entire world situation at his time. This was written following the 9/11 attacks, like within a few months after the attacks had occurred, kind of justifying it post it happening, rather than posting it as like because obviously it is made to be a post hoc justification of the attacks. And I think it was sent to Islamists in Britain, who then translated it into English, giving us the version we have today, which I'm going to read. So there's a lot of people that also don't believe that it's actually from Osama bin Laden, but to be honest, I do believe it would be. There's nothing in it that I don't think that would be. It's nothing in there that I think, oh yeah, this probably wouldn't be him. So I'm going to just run off the assumption that this is the words of Osama bin Laden following the 9/11 attacks, his justification, and that's what I did for my video. If you've watched that video, I do quote, especially at the start of the video, I do heavily quote his letter to America to explain like that it is partly America's fault for the 9/11 attacks. Obviously, it's never justified to attack civilians. He does try to justify in this letter to America, in this manifesto, he does try to justify attacking civilians. I'll get into that. It is never justifiable, obviously, to attack civilians. However, the victims of 9/11 should be should be commemorated the same way the victims of, say, for example, the sanctions in Iraq, which killed 500,000 to 1 million children, should also be commemorated, and the deaths in Palestine and Yemen and Afghanistan and all these regions which America has tormented and bullied. These people deserve the same commemoration as the Westerners who died in the 9/11 attacks. So holding one to be like, oh, you can't talk about 9/11, it's disrespectful to say that America deserved 9/11, yet people justify the Iraq war and the Afghanistan war and what's happening in Palestine at the moment, the genocide in Palestine. People are allowed to, in mainstream media, people are allowed to justify these brutal, like, pretty much genocide in some case, or these brutal wars, and you're not allowed to sort of even push back against the mainstream narrative of Osama bin Laden just attacked America for the sake of attacking America. So I feel like there's a bit of hypocrisy there. So that was kind of the purpose of my video. There are obviously a lot of other people who have recently spoken out like this. The whole America deserved 9/11 thing came from Hasanabi. So it isn't completely uncommon. But say 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, saying anything along these lines would have been considered completely radical. Not that it's considered not radical today, but it's not unheard of either. So I was tempted to use the clip from Hasanabi saying it, just chuck it in there in the intro, but I decided to cut it all out because I thought that the chances of that video remaining on YouTube and not getting taken down or age restricted was quite slim. So I was just hoping to manage to keep it up for as long as possible, which it hasn't been taken down yet. It has probably been restricted a little bit, but it has not been taken off the channel yet, so I'm happy about that so far. I was also planning on making a video about October 7th for this year to release on October 7th, same way I released on September 11th, explaining why Israel's actions caused October 7th. But I feel like a lot of people have already kind of explained that. There's a lot of sources and videos and all that you can look to for that. And the chances of that staying up is so slim, especially considering that the 9/11 one is so slim. Any sort of criticism of Israel, the chances of that staying up is slim to none. So I decided there's not really much point. But anyway, I've been yapping for a bit. I'll start getting into it. So, just again, disclaimer, these aren't my words, these aren't my beliefs. I will explain my position on a lot of these claims made in this manifesto. So there is a lot of stuff that might be quite disturbing if you haven't read this before, but I do think it is important for educational purposes to sort of go line by line and explain Osama bin Laden's manifesto. So we'll see how it goes.
مبين كما أنزلنا على المقتسمين الذين جعلوا القرآن عضين فوربك لنسألنهم أجمعين عما كانوا يعملون فاصدع بما تؤمر وأعرض عن المشركين إنا كفيناك المستهزئين الذين يجعلون مع الله إلها آخر فسوف يعلمون ولقد نعلم أنك يضيق صدرك بما يقولون فسبح بحمد ربك وكن من الساجدين واعبد ربك حتى يأتيك اليقين صدق الله العظيم.
Oh wait, you can probably hear the Quran too loud. But anyway, I feel like the point of using the Quran was not only just the religious justification of using this to sort of explain, hey, I have a religious right to fight against it, but also because obviously it's a very religious community of support that he had at the time. But it also claims that the Americans are those who fight with Satan, or fight on the side of Satan. If I can quote it again, ever feeble is indeed the plot of Satan. So he's claiming not only that he has a right given to him by Allah to fight against the Americans because he is fighting in the name of God, but that the American empire is indeed the plot of Satan, or the work of the devil, pretty much. Which is quite interesting to start off with these two quotes. He does use other quotes later on, but so far this is not the words of Osama bin Laden yet. It is just purely just quotes from his religious text. So to start with, what he first words he writes directly in this manifesto is, some American writers have published articles under the title of "On What Basis Are We Fighting?" These articles have generated a number of responses, some of which adhered to the truth and were based on Islamic law, and others which have not. Here we wanted to outline the truth as an explanation and warning, hoping for Allah's reward, seeking success and support from Him. While seeking Allah's help, we form our reply based on two questions directed at the Americans. Why are we fighting and opposing you? And what are we calling you to, and what do we want from you? So this already breaks up the manifesto into two sections, or two main big sections, which is firstly him explaining why al-Qaeda is fighting and opposing America, which is what I used for my video to explain. And the second section calls upon the American people. It has many calls to actions for the American people, which we'll get into later, but it's kind of less important to describe why he did what he did during 9/11. Okay, so as for the first section, why are we fighting and opposing you? The answer is very simple. Because you attacked us and continue to attack us. Now this is the first section on Palestine, which is why I believe the manifesto went viral 10-11 months ago, whenever it went viral, is because obviously the October 7th and everything, with Palestine being in the mainstream being in the mainstream news and everything. This is the first reason gives. I did quote this in my video. Palestine, which has sunk under military occupation for more than 80 years. The British handed over Palestine with your help and support to the Jews, who have occupied it for more than 50 years. Years overflowing with oppression, tyranny, crimes, killing, expulsion, destruction, and devastation. The creation and continuation of Israel is one of the greatest crimes, and you are the leaders of its criminals. And of course, there is no need to explain and prove the degree of American support for Israel. The creation of Israel is a crime which must be erased. Each and every person whose hands have become polluted in the contribution towards this crime must pay its price, and pay for it heavily. It brings us both laughter and tears to see that you have not yet tired of repeating your fabricated lies that the Jews have a historical right to Palestine, as it was promised to them in the Torah. Anyone who disputes with them on this alleged fact is accused of anti-Semitism. This is one of the most fallacious, widely circulated fabrications in history. The people of Palestine are pure Arabs and original Semites. It is the Muslims who are the inheritors of Moses, peace be upon him, and the inheritors of the real Torah that has not been changed. Muslims believe in all of the prophets, including Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad. Peace and blessings of Allah be upon them all. If the followers of Moses have been promised the right to Palestine in the Torah, then the Muslims are the worthy nation of this. Now, this is where we get into the whole religious history kind of. It's very confusing, but I'll finish off what he says and then kind of break it down. When the Muslims conquered Palestine and drove out the Romans, Palestine and Jerusalem returned to Islam, the religion of all the prophets, peace be upon them all. Therefore, the call to a historical right to Palestine cannot be raised against the Islamic Ummah, which is the community of Muslims, that believes in all prophets of Allah, peace and blessings be upon them. And we make no distinction between the prophets. The blood pouring out of Palestine must be equally revenged. You must know that the Palestinians do not cry alone, their women are not widowed alone, and their sons are not orphaned alone. So there's a lot, in that one section, which is, like I said, this is why the whole thing went viral 10-11 months ago. Americans don't really understand, most Americans, or most people in general, don't understand the religious history, and I feel like there's a lot of lack of education in the West about Islam and its teachings and its practices and etc. So it's hard to break this down, but I'll try my best. Basically, there's the claim that Israel has a right to exist is based off the Torah promising the land to the descendants of Abraham, the Jews. So what Osama bin Laden's talking about here is that the Jews believe they have a right to the land of Palestine because it was promised to them, and they used to live there. They were driven out by the Romans. Well, some of them were driven out by the Romans, but there's always been Jews that have lived in Palestine, the Mizrahim Jews, alongside the Arabs, and the Mizrahim Jews are Arab Jews, basically. And pretty much Islam teaches that all prophets, including Moses, Abraham, Adam, all the prophets of Judaism and Christianity are accepted in Islam, but they believe that Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is the final prophet sent by God to deliver the final message, and they believe that all prophets before him, including Jesus, which they refer to as Prophet Isa, Abraham, Adam, all the prophets going back throughout history, all sent by God, all preach the same message according to Islamic teachings. That Jesus and Abraham, for example, both preach the message that there is only one God, but that the traditions of Judaism and Christianity have corrupted God's message in one way or another, with Christianity claiming that Jesus is actually a Messiah and part God in a way, so that you have the Trinity. As someone who's raised Catholic, there's a belief in the Trinity, where God is not only fully human, but Jesus is not only fully human, but fully God, and that the Father being God, the Son being Jesus, and the Holy Spirit is, it appears in the Bible throughout the Pentecost and etc. Other examples like the burning bush or whatever, that these three elements are all what make up God. Muslims believe this is a corruption, and they point to the Quran, which they believe is the direct word of God. So the Bible, for Christians, believe that the Bible is divinely inspired by God. It's not the direct word of God, but God inspired the people that wrote the Bible to write the Bible. But the Torah, which is the Old Testament in the Bible, is believed by Jews to be the direct word of God, the same way that the Quran is believed by the Muslims to be the direct word of God. And the Muslims accept Torah and the Bible as sacred religious text, but they believe that the Quran is the direct word of God and the final saying of God delivered by the Prophet Muhammad. So, where this gets in, where Osama bin Laden is claiming that Muslims are actually the worthy people of Palestine, is because Allah, the same God that Jews and Christians believe in, same as what the Muslims believe in, promised the land to the descendants of Abraham. All three religions are the Abrahamic religions, right? So the descendants of Abraham were promised this land, and since the Muslims were able to overthrow Roman rule, expel the Romans from Palestine, it shows that God promised them the land and that God gave them the power to overthrow the Romans, pretty much. But that what he says here about the Palestinians being the original Arabs, I'll find it again, the people of Palestine are pure Arabs and original Semites. So the term anti-Semitic, right, is usually just referred to as like anti-Jewish, like racism pretty much. But originally the meaning of anti-Semitism, like the word Semite, right, refers to not only the Jews, but Arabs are also considered Semites because of the Semitic languages and everything. So they're all descendants of Abraham. According to the beliefs of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they are all considered to be the same descendants of Abraham. Because Abraham, he had a wife, right? And he ended up wanting to have a kid with his wife. And he eventually did have a kid with his wife, but before that he actually had a kid with a woman that was living in his house, pretty much the maid at the time or whatever. This is before any laws surrounding any teachings of infidelity and sexual ethics was implemented by God. But Abraham had a child with this other woman, and then when his wife fell pregnant, Abraham expelled this woman and her child from the household, and he ended up having a kid with his original wife, right? So the Jews and the Christians both trace their descendants and the descendants of their prophets through Abraham and his wife, when the Muslims claim that their descendancy and their descendants of their prophets comes from this woman that Abraham had a kid with but wasn't his wife. So this is where the biblical history kind of gets into it. They all all Christians, all Muslims, all Jews believe, well, Jews have a different understanding of it, but they're all the descendants of this one guy, Abraham, right? The Abrahamic religions. So the descendants of Abraham were promised the land in the Torah. The Jews believed that they were promised the land in the Torah, which is the Jewish religious text, and that God promised the land to the Jews, and that the Jews pretty much have this temple which used to exist in Jerusalem, but it was destroyed by the Romans. And following the destruction of the temple, you have what's called Rabbinic Judaism, which basically all the rabbis have their own sort of interpretation, and they have the Talmud and Midrash and all these sort of things, where basically Jewish ideology comes from this discussion between the different rabbis or whatever following the temple. Well, before, when they actually had the temple, all decisions were like centralized under the temple. But anyway, you have the Jews today in Israel who they want to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. However, the Muslims have built the Al-Aqsa Mosque, right? And the Al-Aqsa Mosque is considered one of the top 3 most holiest sites within Islam. There is a meteor, it's a rock in Jerusalem, which is very important for all 3 religions. But the Muslims believe that Muhammad was brought up to Jannah from this meteor, right? But anyway, I'm just yapping now at this point. But anyway, so the Muslims believe that because they are also descendants of Abraham, and because they were the ones living in this land for hundreds of years before the Jews rocked up, before there was always Jews there, but before the Zionists rocked up, you always had the Palestinian Arabs that lived there, and they are also the descendants. They're also Semites. They're also descendants of Abraham, and the genetic build-up of these Palestinians is more likely to be more similar to the original inhabitants of ancient Israel and Judea than the white Jews, the white Zionist Jews that came in during the 40s and earlier before that. But anyway, what Osama bin Laden's claiming here is that it's the Muslims that are worthy of the nation of Palestine under his interpretation of Islam and etc., that because the Muslims overthrew Roman rule with the help of Allah, this proved that yes, the land does belong to the descendants of Abraham, but it belongs to the Muslims, and because it was the Muslims that overthrew them, the land belongs to the Muslims. And throughout Ottoman rule of the land, throughout the time when the Muslims ruled it, through Ottoman rule and everything, Jews, Christians, and Muslims all lived side by side. The Jews and the Christians would pay extra tax because it was a quite corrupt system of Islamic rule. However, when you consider how the Jews were treated in Europe during this time, you can't really whinge about anti-Semitism within the Ottoman Empire, where it's like, well, you pay a bit more taxes in the Ottoman Empire if you're a Jew or a Christian, but if you're a Jew in Europe, you're kind of getting bounced around all these different countries, and then some other country invades this country, and now you're being genocided again, well, not genocided, but like massacred again, and then moved around and pushed around all around Europe. And that's pretty much the history of the Jews post their exodus from the ancient land of Israel and Judea. But there's also, I might watch this video later on stream if you guys are interested. There's a whole another can of worms with ancient Israel and everything, which might be interesting. But anyway, I've been yapping about this for way too long. Basically, Osama bin Laden is claiming that the Palestinians have a right to the land because they are Muslim, and the Muslims are the ones that expelled the Romans with the help of Allah, and that since they are also descendants of Abraham, God promised the land in the Torah and in the Quran to the descendants of Abraham. He did not promise it to the Jews, because at the time the Jews were the ones following the prophet Abraham, who was sent by God, but then they were corrupted, and Judaism was corrupted, but then Christianity came along, and they also believed that was a corruption, but then Islam came along, and that set everything straight. And that's basically the whole historical avenue and religious avenue. It's very confusing, but anyways, it doesn't matter. Even if you don't believe in any of it, the Palestinians were there, the Jews came in, they had no right to be there, they have no right to be committing the genocide they did. The Nakba, it's very simple. You don't need to any of the biblical history to understand what's going on in Gaza right now is a genocide, and what's been going on in Palestine for all these years is the purest example of genocide in modern history. But anyway, we'll move on from that because I think I talked about it in my video as well. But yeah, he also talks about the conflict in Somalia. To quote him, "You attacked us in Somalia, you supported the Russian atrocities against us in Chechnya, the Indian oppression against us in Kashmir, and the Jewish aggression against us in Lebanon." So you have the whole Somalian conflict, Americans' war in Somalia as well. The Russians committed many atrocities against the Muslim population in Chechnya, which is a Muslim region of Russia. And now this is also something I find quite interesting, the Indian oppression against us in Kashmir. Sorry. If you know about the Kashmir situation, there's a region in India pretty much called Jammu and Kashmir, which is the one Muslim majority state in India. It's in the north, quite close to the Punjab, which is the Sikh majority state. But basically, the Indians have continued their control over this region, pretty much oppressed the population in this region, and there has been many paramilitary fighting groups fighting against this rule. It's all part of this larger conflict between Pakistan and India following the British removal. So basically, Britain used to control it all. They pulled out in 1948. Big problems because they just drew a line on a map, caused millions of deaths. You know, great stuff. Same thing happened in Palestine as well. British pulling out, and you know, Britain's lovely, does great stuff. Yeah, but anyway, there's the whole or everything that's going on in Kashmir is basically the Indian government has this Hindu nationalist philosophy where they ideology, where they believe that Hindus are superior to the Muslim population in India and the Sikh population in India, etc. And they've committed all these atrocities in this Muslim region. And this is one of Osama bin Laden's reasons as well, because India is an ally of the West. And basically that's why you have the whole Hotel Mumbai and all these other terrorist attacks that occur in India, Islamic terrorist attacks, is because of what the Indian government has done to many Muslims within their borders, and also the wars in all these Muslim countries like Pakistan. Also, the Jewish aggression against us in Lebanon refers to Israel, the Zionist state, which also attacked Lebanon. And this is what I wanted to bring up in my video, but I wasn't really able to do it in a efficient way, really. But basically, Israel invaded Lebanon before 9/11. I think it was 1983. Correct me if I'm wrong. But when the Jews invaded Lebanon, they laid siege to Beirut and they completely destroyed the city. And there was all these images at the time, right, of all the buildings in Beirut with smoke coming out of their out of the windows of these buildings. The whole city was just covered in smoke. There was buildings crumbling, and these were the pictures and videos that Osama bin Laden and KYM and all these sort of the people that organized the September 11th attacks were seeing. And when they saw this, they were like, we need to do the same thing, that we must revenge these atrocities committed in Lebanon. And they decided that they wanted to see the same pictures in a major American city, so that the Christians, all these Christian nations, which they believe America, like we mentioned earlier, is committing the acts of Satan. They wanted to see the same things being done to the Americans as had been done to them in Lebanon by the American vassal state of Israel. So that's the main intention for flying the planes into the building, that part of the whole attack, was because they wanted to see the same images being portrayed as what happened in Beirut, which they were successful in doing so. Okay. Under your supervision, consent, and orders, the governments of our countries, which act as your agents, attack us on a daily basis. So I talked about this, all the dictatorships in the Middle East that the Americans support, and all the crimes they commit against their populations and all of that. These governments prevent our people from establishing the Islamic Sharia, using violence and lies to do so. These governments give us a taste of humiliation and place us in a large prison of fear and subdue. These governments steal our ummah's wealth and sell it to you at a paltry price. These governments have surrendered to the Jews and handed them most of Palestine. Going back to this again, acknowledging the existence of their state over the dismembered limbs of their own people. Sorry. The removal of these governments is an obligation upon us and a necessary step to free the Ummah and make the Sharia and supreme law and to regain Palestine. And our fight against these governments is not separate from our fight against you. This is important to talk about as well, okay? So, one of the main reasons for American influence in the Middle East is obviously the oil. This is what he's referring to as stealing the Islamic community's wealth and selling it to the Americans. These governments have betrayed their own people, according to Osama bin Laden, and are selling this oil to the Americans to make money for themselves, which is benefiting the Americans, which is why the Americans have all this influence over the Islamic world, right? Over the Middle East and everything. So, what I talk about in my video as well, which also continues to happen, which is one of the things that I mentioned before, Osama bin Laden was kind of proved right in this sense. All of these governments in the Middle East, all these American imposed dictatorships in the Middle East, have recognized the state of Israel. So when you learn about the history of Israel, pretty much you have the whole thing where when they were established, all the Arab countries came to the defense of Palestine and laid war against the Israelis. Then in 1967, the same thing happened. Israel invaded Egypt and all this. And Osama bin Laden sees the recognition of Israel as a betrayal of the Palestinian people, and rightfully so, pretty much. These Arab countries are witnessing a genocide against these Arab people of Palestine and are accepting Jewish supremacist rule in this region. I feel like, from my perspective, right, I don't think any rule in any land should be supremacist. Same way in India, where you have the Hindu nationalists, which I talked about with Kashmir. You have a government which is Hindu nationalist, which talks of the supremacy of the Hindu people over the Sikhs and Muslims within the country. Now in Palestine, you have Zionist rule, which views Jews as being superior to the Muslims within Palestine and within occupied Palestine and what is now considered Israel. So basically, Osama bin Laden is viewing. Oh God, Osama bin Laden is viewing what is being done in Palestine at the moment and the recognition of the Jewish state by all these Muslim countries as a betrayal of the Palestinian people. And this is why he's referring back to Palestine as he had in the first section. So, these are 2 or 3 things that I mentioned in my video that I posted 3 days ago. The 2 or 3 of the main reasons for the 9/11 attacks. You have 1, the support of the Jewish state and the genocide against the Palestinian people. Other examples of these sort of supremacist states attacking Muslim communities, such as what's been done in Kashmir in India and Somalia, and also the support of these dictatorships in the Middle East, which oppress their people and steal the wealth of these countries. for the interests of America, who have betrayed the Arab and Muslim community by supporting and recognizing the Jewish state, and also the siege of Beirut, which was a direct motivation for the whole idea of smoke coming out of the buildings in New York, was to replicate what had been done in Beirut, with the smoke coming out of all those buildings there due to the Israeli invasion. Now, to continue on, you steal our wealth and oil at paltry prices because of your international influence and military threats. This theft is indeed the biggest theft ever witnessed by mankind and in the history of the world. Your forces occupy our countries, you spread your military bases throughout them, you corrupt our lands and besiege our sanctities to protect the security of the Jews and to ensure the continuity of your pillage of our treasures. Basically, he's talking about the American military bases that have been established in the Holy Land of Saudi Arabia, where Mecca and Medina are. Basically, America has put all these military bases in the Middle East and has continued to put more and more military outposts in the Middle East to protect, Israel, and to protect their interests of stealing the oil from the Middle East. Hence the Iraq War and all that. Speaking of Iraq, you have starved the Muslims of Iraq, where children die every day. It is a wonder that more than 1.5 million Iraqi children have died as a result of your sanctions, and you did not show concern. Yet when 3,000 of your own people died, the entire world rose and has not yet sat down. Can you do a video on the history of the Greece versus Turkey war? What would that video regard? What would I be talking about? Let's see in this comment as well on my 9/11 video. But yeah. To continue this on, basically this is what I mentioned before. Obviously I'm not justifying the 9/11 attacks. It is never justifiable to attack a civilian population. However, the same commemoration that is shown to the 3,000 Westerners who died as a result of the September 11 attacks, the same commemoration should be shown to the Iraqi children who were starved to death by the American sanctions, which were completely illegal. That were placed on Iraq following the Gulf War. America's the one that put Saddam Hussein into power. They supported him, despite him gassing his own people, gassing the Kurds within Iraq, and all the sort of chemical weapons he used against Iran. They also supported Iran during that war too, so that they could use that money to fund the Contras, who committed countless atrocities in Nicaragua. And this was all done just to expand America's influence in the world, especially in the Middle East. Following the Iran-Iraq war, when Saddam Hussein became a sort of problem for the Americans, a thorn in their back, even though they were the ones that put him in place, in power in the first place. Following this, they launched the Gulf War and all of this, supported Kuwait, which is another dictatorship in the Middle East, which is an American vassal state, which gives America oil. Basically, Kuwait had antagonized Iraq, and when Iraq invaded, the Americans launched their Gulf War. They failed after committing countless atrocities in Iraq during the Gulf War. They failed in their end goal and decided to instead just sanction Iraq. These same sanctions are placed on countries like Cuba, Iran, and North Korea today, where their whole intention is to just keep the country as poor as possible, to basically push these people to the brink of starvation, or to starvation in the case of Iraq, in the hopes that these people get so fed up that they will overthrow the government, so America can put their own little friendly government in place. So, what we're talking about here is basically the whole point of the Iraq sanctions following the Gulf War was the Americans were aiming to upset the Iraqi people so much by starving them to death and starving their children to death. Like nearly 1 million children were starved to death during this period, in order for the Iraqi people to overthrow Saddam Hussein, who the Americans had put in power in the first place for their own strategic interests. They wanted to remove Saddam Hussein now because they couldn't remove him in the Gulf War, so that way they could, put some other friendly dictator in place that is also going to oppress the Muslim population, also allow for Israel to continue, and also hand over the oil to the Americans, which is the whole point of the Iraq War. Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. They made up nonsense about the WMDs, weapons of mass destruction, so they could invade Iraq. So that way they can remove Saddam, just like they had wanted to. After starving 1 million children to death, they invaded Iraq, killed another 1 million people. It's great stuff, yeah. But anyway, to continue on, you have supported the Jews in their idea that Jerusalem is their eternal capital and agreed to move your embassy there. Donald Trump moved his embassy to the embassy of the Americans in Israel to Jerusalem. With your help and under your protection, the Israelis are planning to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Under the protection of your weapons, Shahran entered the Al-Aqsa Mosque to pollute it as a preparation to capture and destroy it. Okay. Have you listened to Blowback? They talked about the Iraq War, Cuban Revolution, Korean War, and Afghanistan in the 20th of this month, a season on Cambodia. Oh, Jesus! I have watched Blowback. I listened to them on Spotify. I listened to the first 3 or 4 seasons. I think I'm halfway through season 4. I didn't know they were doing another season on Cambodia though. That'll probably be quite interesting with Pol Pot and all of that. But yeah, I would definitely recommend a lot of stuff I talk about here, such as everything that goes on with Iraq and everything. If you want more information and more in-depth detail accounts of all of this sort of stuff, definitely listen to the season of Blowback on the Iraq War. It's very interesting. What are your thoughts on Saddam Hussein? I'll probably leave this for an actual proper video. I want to do a proper video series explaining my thoughts on leaders such as Muammar Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein and Ayatollah Khomeini and all these sort of leaders in the Middle East. But like I said, Saddam Hussein was put in power by the Americans. He was at one point an ally of the Soviet Union. He committed many war crimes against his population, which the Americans knew about and continued to fund him and allow him to do so. They then turned on him when he became no longer useful. And yeah, that's pretty much explains the whole history of Saddam Hussein's rule. Following 9/11, they claimed that he was involved even though he wasn't. Then they claimed that he had weapons of mass destruction, which obviously he didn't, because there's a reason they don't just invade Korea again. When first time they invaded Korea during the Korean War, they killed 1/5 of the population. There's a reason that North Korea developed nuclear weapons was to protect their own people. And the reason America isn't able to invade them again and massacre their people again is because they have weapons of mass destruction. So if Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, there's no chance that America would have invaded. It was complete nonsense. They knew about this. It was a complete lie just to further American interests. Can you do a video on the history of Greece and Turkey? What would I even make that video about? Like, what's the purpose behind a video on Greece and Turkey, their conflict and everything? I have made a video on the Greek Civil War before, the conflict between the communists and the British monarchists in the country. I mean, look at the state of both countries today. Greece is completely destroyed because of the EU, and the whole inflation crisis. But yeah, I would be interested in doing a video on that, but I think it's done already, that whole thing on Greece. But I'm not sure what I would make a video about Greece and Turkey about, like, to describe it. I might make a video actually on Constantinople and Istanbul and the whole religious sort of situation that goes on there. But if that is something that people would be interested in, I would be interested in making a video on it. However, I should probably continue on. This is not a very long manifesto, but I mean I'm yapping quite a bit. So anyway, 2. The tragedies and calamities are only a few examples of your oppression and aggression against us. It is commanded by our religion and intellect that the oppressed have a right to return the aggression. Do not await anything from us but jihad, resistance, and revenge. Is it in any way rational to expect that after America has attacked us for more than half a century, that we will leave then that we will then leave her to live in security and peace. No. So, basically, the main difference between, in my personal experience, studying Islam and studying Christianity is that Christianity has this whole idea of, and like many religions, this understanding of peace is very different between the two religions. The word Islam and Muslim originate from the Hebrew word shalom, meaning peace. In Arabic, this is salam. That's why you greet people with assalamu alaikum and walaikum assalam. Salam refers to peace in Arabic, and the whole idea of Islam, meaning someone that has submitted to God, is a Muslim is someone who has submitted to God, and Islam is named after this submission to the one and only God, Allah. So the whole idea of Islam is this idea of peace. And originally, in the early days of Muhammad's, when Muhammad was preaching, it was taught that they were not to fight back. There was a lot of the early converts were slaves and etc., and they were brutalized and oppressed by the leaders at the time. And Allah came down, and in the Quran it shows Allah came down and told Muhammad that they had a right to fight back, but there were certain rules given to the Muslims, which, like you have the paramilitary groups such as the Houthis today and Hamas, with their taking of hostages, continue to follow this Islamic law given to them in the Quran. And the whole idea behind this is one of the main things is you can't forcefully convert any of your prisoners of war to Islam. And there's other rules about not being able to brutalize and etc. But anyway, Islam is a very it's very interesting in the sense that, you know how you have the whole idea in Christianity, if someone slaps you on the face, you turn the other cheek, let them slap you on the other side of the face. Islam does not operate that way. It teaches quite early on in the Quran, from my memory, I read it probably a few weeks ago now, that if someone were to attack you, you have a right to defend yourself. And Islam is a very strong religion in that sense of they're not just going to accept that sort of brutality and let it happen, and rightfully so. The same way in Ireland, where I'm from, the British came in, they brutalized, they raped and pillaged their way through our land. It is the right of the Irish to form paramilitary groups such as the Irish Republican Army to fight against this imperialism. And these groups do have a right to fight back against the oppression and colonization. The same way that the Muslims have a right to fight back against American domination, colonization, and influence within the Middle East, especially when the Americans are supporting, we can say supporting, aiding, they are collaborating and working with the state of Israel in their genocide against the Palestinians. They are starving Muslim people at this point in time, and they are doing all this to steal the oil and steal the wealth from this region for their own interests. So Osama bin Laden's claim that they do have a right to attack the Americans back, I believe is valid. However, it is not valid to attack civilian targets, the same, which is what they did in during 9/11. They attacked purely civilian targets. Same way America had targeted civilian targets in the Gulf War, and same way that the Israelis targeted civilian targets during the Nakba, during their invasion of Lebanon, etc. The same sort of critique is not often given for the West as it is for these paramilitary groups such as al-Qaeda. But anyway, you may then dispute that all above does not justify aggression against civilians, just as I have said, for crimes they did not commit and offences in which they did not partake. Now, this is referring to what I said earlier when I was explaining that he does try to justify attacking civilians. This is justification here. This argument contradicts your continuous repetition that America is the land of freedom and its leaders in this world. Therefore, the American people are the ones who choose their government by way of their own free will, a choice which stems from their agreement to its policies. Thus, the American people have chosen, consented to, and affirmed their support for the Israeli oppression of the Palestinians, the occupation and usurpation of their land, and its continuous killing, torture, punishment, and expulsion of the Palestinians. The American people have the ability and choice to refuse the policies of their government and even to change it if they want. The American people are the ones who pay taxes, which fund the planes that bomb us in Afghanistan, the tanks that strike and destroy our homes in Palestine, the armies which occupy our lands in the Arabian Gulf, and the fleets which ensure the blockade of Iraq. These tax dollars are given to Israel for it to continue to attack us and penetrate our lands. So the American people are the ones who fund these attacks against us, and they are the ones who oversee the expenditure of these monies in the way they wish through their elected candidates. Okay. Also, the American army is part of the American people. It is this very same people who are shamelessly helping the Jews fight against us. The American people are the ones who employ both their men and their women in the American forces which attack us. This is why the American people cannot be innocent of all the crimes committed by the Americans and Jews against us. This is what I was saying earlier, him defending attacking civilian targets. Allah the Almighty legislated and the permission and the option to take revenge. Thus, if we are attacked, then we have the right to attack back. That's what I was talking about earlier. Whoever has destroyed our villages and towns, then we have the right to destroy their villages and towns. Whoever has stolen our wealth, then we have a right to destroy their economy, which is the whole point of attacking the World Trade Center. And whoever has killed our civilians, then we have a right to kill theirs. The American government and press still refuses to answer the question, why did they attack us in New York and Washington? If Sharon is a man of peace in the eyes of Bush, then we are also men of peace. America does not understand the language of manners and principles, so we are addressing it using the language it understands. So here's where I have this sort of problem, right? What Osama is saying basically is that since America claims it is a democracy, they either have to contradict this claim to claim that the innocence of the victims of 9/11. They would need to contradict this claim, because if the American people were truly living in a democratic society, they could decide to stop these actions in the Middle East. However, obviously as communists we understand this is not the case. Americans do not live in a free and democratic society as the American government claims. Obviously, if you ask the average American, they would probably support the idea of having a universal healthcare system the same way most Western countries have a universal healthcare system. America is the only developed country that doesn't have this. They have a very lackluster education system. There's a lot of policies that the American government, basically what I'm trying to get at, a lot of policies the American government has, which the average American would not agree with. However, their system, through the two-party system where they only have Democrats and Republicans, and both these parties serve the same interests. So, the way that America operates is by having these two parties which both serve the interests of imperialism and both serve the interests of the bourgeoisie. Americans do not have a choice, do not have the option through the American system of electoralism to take the power away from the American government. So, claiming that the Americans are responsible for the crimes in Palestine when you look at the mass protests and the amount of people in America that do not support Israel as a state. Obviously, it's a lot less due to the propaganda in America compared to other Western countries. But, America, the average American citizen is not responsible for these crimes. It is the American system which is designed in a way to expand America's influence in the Middle East, right? So blaming these citizens and claiming that they are not innocent, I do believe is wrong. However, if we were to take this into account and consider the innocent civilians killed in, say, for example, Palestine, let's say Iraq and Afghanistan, right? The Iraq War and the Afghanistan War. Like I said before, Saddam Hussein was put in power by the Americans, not by popular vote of the Iraqi people. The Iraqi people did not decide for Saddam Hussein, and the Iraqi people definitely did not support chemical weapons being used against them by their dictator, right? So they are not responsible for the actions of Saddam Hussein, and sanctioning Iraq due to the actions of Saddam Hussein, regardless of how justified they were, starving little children who wouldn't have been able to vote even if the electoral system works, who did not vote for this guy because he's a dictator that was put in power by the Americans, is considerably worse, especially when you consider the much higher death count of over 500,000 Iraqi children that were killed due to these sanctions. These children were much more innocent, if you consider it that way, than the Americans, who may have had a choice to vote for Bush, or may have had a choice to vote in the American system, even though it's corrupted and they would not have been able to actually make a difference. It is not right to target civilians in any situation, but especially when it's America that put this guy in power and then starved their people, it's killed 500,000 children to further their interest in the Middle East when they caused that problem, the same way in Afghanistan, where they killed countless tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands in their Afghan war after spending billions funding the Mujahideen, putting the Taliban in power to further their interests against the Soviet influence in that country, and then left the Taliban in power 20 years later when they left, after committing all these atrocities. Sorry, but what I'm trying to get at here is basically, it is not justified for Osama bin Laden to have attacked and to have killed 3,000 innocent civilians who are not responsible for their government's actions, although Americans would be considered much more responsible for the actions of their government if we are to take account that America claims to be a free and democratic country. If America is such a free and democratic country, these people decided on their leaders, and therefore it would be justified in some sort of capacity. Not completely, but in some sort of capacity it would be justified. However, it is completely unjustifiable in the case of Iraq. So it's funny how we look at and we commemorate the deaths of 9/11 for the tragedy it was. However, we do not commemorate the deaths of all these innocent people in the Middle East that America has caused. Anyway, that's just what I wanted to say on that. Anyway, we'll move on. Thus, if we are attacked, then we have the right to attack back. Whoever has destroyed our villages and towns, then we have a right to destroy their villages and towns. Whoever has stolen our wealth, we have a right to destroy their economy. And whoever has killed our civilians, then we have a right to kill theirs. The American government and press still refuses to answer the question, why did they attack us in New York and Washington? If Sharon is a man of peace in the eyes of Bush, then we are also men of peace. America does not understand the language of manners and principles, so we are addressing it using the language it understands. Basically, tit for tat. And this is the second part of it. You know, I talked about there's two main sections of the his manifesto. This second section basically explains what he's calling upon the American people. First thing is it's a religious calling again. He's calling them to the religion of Islam. So we'll avoid that for now, because I've already talked way too much about religion and Islamic principles and all that already. But the second thing we call you to is to stop your oppression, lies, immorality, and debauchery that is spread amongst you. We call you to be a people of manners, principles, honor, and purity, to reject the immoral acts of fornication, homosexuality, intoxicants, gambling, and trading with interest. We call you to all of this so that you may be free from that which you have become caught up in. Basically, another call of religion. But he also talks about calling the Americans to reject their government's policies in the Middle East and their actions. The freedom and democracy that you call to is for yourselves and for the white race only, and for the rest of the world you impose upon them your monstrous, destructive policies and governments, which you call the American friends. Yet you prevent them from establishing democracies. When the Islamic Party in Algeria wanted to practice democracy and they won the election, you unleash your agents in the Algerian army onto them and to attack them with tanks and to imprison them and torture them. A new lesson from the American Book of Democracy. So, as a communist, I've talked about this a lot. Americans, allies, often are restricted from democracy. We look at Chile, for example, in the 70s. They elected Salvador Allende. He was overthrown by the CIA. Here in Australia, we elected Gough Whitlam, who was went against American interests as well, also by the CIA. Salvador Allende, I should mention, went against American interests. So even though it's democracy until it isn't. The second democracy becomes invaluable for the Americans, second it becomes a threat to the Americans, they'll unleash their dogs in the CIA or the Algerian army, for example, to halt this democracy. And if this whole facade of democracy doesn't work, then they'll just impose a dictator like Saddam Hussein. So, this second section of the whole manifesto is less important to describe Osama bin Laden's intentions, but going through line by line in that first section was very important and something I wasn't really able to do in my video. So hopefully this gives a very more in-depth understanding. So I'll finish with the final quotes from the Quran that he gives. Quran. Do you fear them? Allah has more right that you should fear him if you are believers. Fight against them so that Allah will punish them by your hands and disgrace them and give you victory over them and heal the breasts of believing people and remove the anger of their believers' hearts. Allah accepts the repentance of whom he wills. Allah is all-knowing, all-wise. But honor, power, and glory belong to Allah and to his messenger Muhammad, peace be upon him, and to the believers. So do not become weak against your enemy, nor be sad, and you will be superior in victory if you are indeed true believers. Think not of those who are killed in the way of Allah as dead. Nay, they are alive with their Lord, and they are being provided for. They rejoice in what Allah has bestowed upon them from his bounty, and rejoice for the sake of those who have not yet joined them, but are left behind, not yet martyred, that on them no fear shall come, nor shall they grieve. They rejoice in a grace and a bounty from Allah, and that Allah will not waste the reward of the believers. It is he who has sent his messenger, Muhammad, peace be upon him, with guidance and the religion of truth, Islam, to make it victorious over all the other religions, even though the polytheists hate it. Allah has decreed that verily it is I and my messengers who shall be victorious. Verily Allah, an all-powerful, almighty. These final quotes from the Quran is what he ends his manifesto with, just as he started his manifesto with quotes from the Quran. Basically, he is claiming that, and if you listen to his interview, the final interview he did with any Western journalist before his death at the hands of the American Empire, he said that he called upon a jihad, which is holy war, against the Americans because Bush, after following 9/11, declared a crusade, in his words, a crusade against the Muslim world by invading Iraq and by invading Afghanistan especially, which is America supported the Mujahideen. I talked about this in my video. Put the Taliban in power. The Taliban allowed for al-Qaeda. It's important to recognize this. Al-Qaeda, the Mujahideen, Osama bin Laden used to be a Mujahideen freedom fighter and was funded by the Americans early on, decades before his attack. Now, the Taliban, which was also a splinter group from this Mujahideen, protected Osama bin Laden within Afghanistan, and when America invaded Afghanistan, this is what this part of the letter to America is about. He is saying that these quotes from the Quran prove that Allah is going to protect the Muslim fighters, and any Muslim fighter that dies is going to be rewarded in Jannah, and that they will win this shahad with the grace of Allah because they are the true light within Islam, and that these, as he mentioned at the start, the Americans are working through the deeds of Satan. And as we have seen with a lot of, in the future, with a lot of hindsight, we can see that this is another thing which might have actually been proven correct by him, because the Taliban, against all odds, defeated the American forces and reclaimed control over the Muslim lands of Afghanistan. So, yeah, as he said, if the Americans refuse to listen to our advice and the goodness, guidance, and great righteousness that we call them to, then be aware that you will lose this crusade that Bush began, just like the other previous crusades in which you were humiliated in the hands of the Mujahideen, fleeing to your home in great silence and disgrace. If the Americans do not respond, then their fate will be the fate of the Soviets who fled from Afghanistan to deal with their military defeat, political breakup, ideological downfall, and economic bankruptcy. So yeah, quite interesting. Hopefully you guys found this as interesting as I did, and hopefully if you guys don't understand anything, I will probably make another few live streams such as this. I'll be able to explain a bit further in detail what I meant, but definitely do listen to the Blowback podcast, the seasons on Iraq and Afghanistan. Very interesting, explain in great detail a lot of the stuff which I tried to explain in this live stream. Definitely, if you haven't already, watch that video I've made on 9/11. It explains a lot of this in more detail and breaks apart the main reasons that Osama bin Laden had given in this letter to America for why he committed the acts in 9/11. But anyway, that'll probably be the end of this live stream. Thank you all for watching. Hope you guys appreciated it. Hope you guys understand or have gained any sort of further understanding. That's the goal of this at the end of the day. But I appreciate all the support I got in the last video, despite YouTube obviously restricting it in many ways. Hopefully it doesn't get taken down, fingers crossed. But anyways, do watch it before it does get taken down. But yeah, definitely. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. May Allah bless you all.